Good afternoon, General Powell, and thank you very much for taking the time to answer a few questions for the French veterans of the First Gulf War. So, the Operation Desert Storm started actually on the 17th of January 1991, and the coalition among which France and the United States belonged was on the eve of starting a large offensive against what was commonly called the Fourth Army of the world at that time. How did you plan and conceive this vast offensive, sir?
Well, first of all, let me begin by thanking the French government, the French people, and the French armed forces who are participating in Operation Desert Storm. The French contribution was part of a great coalition. It's hard to imagine today. We had Syrians, we had Egyptians, we had the Soviet Union. Everybody came together to reverse the Iraqi aggression. When it occurred and we realized that this very large Iraqi army was going to be in Kuwait and was planning to occupy it forever, the first thing you do as a commander looking at a situation like that is you evaluate the enemy. And we realized that the Iraqi army was the fourth largest in the world at that time, but we also saw vulnerabilities. They didn't have superb chain of logistics. They had positioned themselves in Kuwait in a way where they were mostly fixed. They were not mobile as we could be. So as we designed the plan, we had really two phases. The first phase was to build up our forces quickly to make sure that the Iraqis would not come south into Saudi Arabia. And the 6th your light division played an important role in that. And then once we were sure that they couldn't possibly come south and succeed, then we began thinking about an offense. And President Bush gave us permission to think as broadly as we wished to, and General Schwarzkopf and I and his commanders decided that we should double the size of the force from 250,000 to 500,000. And as we were building up our force, we kept watching the enemy. And we had divisions in front of us who were fixed. They couldn't move. They were there. It's nice to have an enemy that can't move because then you know how to deal with it. They also had some divisions along the coast looking out to the sea. They were fixed. They couldn't move. So a large part of the Iraqi army was fixed in position and easy to deal with or to know how to deal with. And that's what we did. We essentially put together a force so that there would be a supporting attack coming from the south that would fix those divisions so they couldn't really move, and then we would go around them. It wasn't a difficult military solution. I'm surprised everybody didn't see this. It was obvious what we would do. And for the divisions that were on the coast looking out into the straits, the water, they thought we would have an amphibious operation to take them. And my Marines really wanted to have an amphibious operation. And I said, mais non, there's no need. You just keep them fixed and we will cut them off without losing any Marines in an amphibious operation. And that's what we did. And we placed the forces appropriately. The Marines right directly across the border, the heavy corps going around. The 6th Armored Light Brigade, Light Division of the French Army would be on the far flank in order to protect that flank, and they did an excellent job of performing that mission. And I was so confident, and General Schwarzkopf was so confident in this plan that we were able to tell President Bush and the other world leaders who were involved in this that we could guarantee the outcome. I can't tell you what the casualties will be yet. I can't tell you how long it will take, but there's no question in our mind that the plan would succeed.
Coming back to the casualties, sir, when you started the planning of the operation, according to the intelligence you had and the threat of chemical weapons, what was the casualty rate you were foreseeing?
A lot of the media and the experts who were not in the government, in the think tanks, they all were saying 10,000 dead, 20,000 dead. General Schwarzkopf and I never thought it would be that high. Between us, we were probably thinking between maybe 3,000 and 5,000 at the worst. Chemical weapons were a problem, but at the same time, we had equipment, we had clothing, we had masks. We knew how to deal with chemical weapons. We had trained to fight in a chemical weapons environment for decades in Europe. as part of our containment force against the Soviet Union. So I also considered the fact that chemical weapons tend to blow away. They're not always persistent. We can move around them. So I didn't think the chemical weapons would be that great a threat, although they have an emotional aspect to them. They can be very effective as a terror weapon. Mm-hmm. But as an actual weapon to stop our movement, I did not think chemical weapons would be a problem. And so we thought between 3,000 to 5,000, and it turned out to be much, much less than that. We were very happy.
So when the offensive started, the overwhelming success of the offensive that started on the 24th of January was not a surprise for you, sir?
It was a surprise in the sense that the casualties were much lower than I thought they would be. We were able to move much faster than I thought we'd be able to move. And the really, really big surprise was that the units that were going straight in, the Marines, it turned out that they were able to penetrate the front lines of those Iraqi divisions. You remember everybody was talking about fire pits and minefields and everything.
Yes, sir.
But these brave Marines penetrated, cut lanes through. And when the offensive started, they went right through. And once they opened up the penetration, then the Marines shot through. And before I knew it, they were on their way to Kuwait City. And we had to speed up everything. And that's what I was, I remind your colleagues watching this that you can have planes, you can have missiles, you can have the most sophisticated equipment in the world. But at the end of the day, it was a Marine, a soldier, crawling on his belly, just like for the last 5,000 years, who really was the key to opening up this battle and to creating this success.
And so according to this success, the decision made by your president to stop the offensive 4 days after it had started and not to go until its end, where was this decision made, sir?
Well, the decision was made before the war ever started, that the mission was to kick the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. It was not to go to Baghdad. It was not to occupy Iraq. It was not to try to change the regime, although we hoped the regime would collapse. And that very specific mission to kick the Iraqi army out of Kuwait is what allowed us to build a strong coalition. And if we had ever changed that mission, then I think the coalition would have started to fall apart. And that was never President Bush's intent. His intent and the UN resolution and our congressional resolution was to kick the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. The only thing that I think people can argue about and say, well, okay, but did you stop too soon? Shouldn't you have destroyed more of the Iraqi army, more of the Revolutionary Guard? Shouldn't you have destroyed more of the tanks? That, I think, is a legitimate criticism of us. We felt that at that point, the mission had been achieved. The Iraqi army was streaming out of Kuwait. We know we had damaged it severely. It was always my judgment that we don't want to destroy the Iraqi army because Iran is still just across the border. And remember, they fought for 8 years. And so we didn't want to destroy the Iraqi army so that it was not able to at least defend itself from an Iranian invasion. But at the same time, we could be criticized for not having attrited or killed more of the Iraqis or destroyed more of the equipment. But it was the president's judgment, which we all agreed with, that we have accomplished the basic mission. Mm-hmm. It was a specific mission with a specific political charter that allowed us to create a great coalition. So I've never had any second thoughts about whether or not the president made the right decision. He made the right decision.
And so in 2003, another coalition started another war against the Iraq of Saddam Hussein with different objectives due to the situation regarding terrorism and fight for democracy. Mm-hmm. According to you, what are the fundamental differences between those two wars?
Well, the first war was a limited war, and it was a war. It had nothing to do with nation building. It had nothing to do with changing the political system in Iraq or being responsible for Iraq. In the second conflict, when I spoke to President Bush about it, I said, you know, this is something we ought to try to avoid. If the issue is weapons of mass destruction, let's see if we can clear that up. But Mr. President, you need to understand, if we are going in to change the regime, to bring down Saddam Hussein and his government, we can do that. But you need to understand, at that point, you become the government. We become the government. So it's a completely different mission. And it is not just nation building. When you take out somebody's government, you are the government. And you own it until you can transfer it back to its own people. And I think we did not handle that part of it well. It was not hard to get to Baghdad. It was a relatively straightforward and simple operation. But once we got to Baghdad and the government fell, chaos broke out. And shortly after that, the insurgency began. And in my judgment, and not shared by everybody, in my judgment, we should have put in many more troops in order to suppress violence within the cities and to let everybody know we're in charge. And we're in charge until we have a chance to properly turn the government back over to the Iraqis. It was what we did in Germany and in Japan after World War II. We became the government and then turned it back over to the people. We thought it would just sort of happen in Iraq, and it didn't happen that way. And I might add that the people who were criticizing us in Desert Storm for not going all the way to Baghdad, when they saw in 2003 what happens when you go all the way to Baghdad, they stopped criticizing us for not having gone to Baghdad.
And finally, sir, were you happy with the presence of France and its soldiers in '91 with you?
Yes, I was. I often say to my American friends, and all of your French diplomats know this little story. You know, we sometimes get annoyed with our French friends, and our French friends sometimes get annoyed with us. And I say, you know, you have to remember, the French were with us at the very beginning in our Revolutionary War. If it hadn't been for French help, we may never have become a country. So just remember what we owe the French over these many years. And just remember that we have been married to the French for 230 years. And we have been in marriage counseling with the French for 230 years. But the marriage is intact because we're allies, we're friends. We believe in the same things. And there's nothing wrong with having disagreements from time to time. At the time of the Gulf War, there were a few areas of disagreement. We wanted information as to how some of the French weapons systems worked that were sold to the Iraqis. Everybody sold things to the Iraqis. And we had difficulty getting the technical information we wanted in order to be able to defeat those French systems. And there was a debate initially where the French political authorities and military authorities did not want the French forces to be directly under either General Khalid or under General Schwarzkopf. And it would have been okay because they were out on the flank, but the French commanders, General Rochefort and others, realized you can't be on a battlefield and not be part of the command arrangement. And so that we worked out. It took a little time, but we worked it out. But your commander, General Rochefort, did a brilliant job. We were very, very happy with him. We just thought he was terrific. General Schmidt and I had a terrific relationship. And Admiral Langsad and I, from time to time, would also meet. And so I was satisfied. But there were little problems from time to time. Hey, c'est la vie.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're good, sir.
My best to all the veterans who are sitting there, and to each and every one of you, I thank you for your service and your sacrifice in Desert Storm.